There's a moment when you realize that everything you thought you knew about power was a children's story told by those who never possessed it. It arrives like a whisper in the space between heartbeats, when the last vestige of your need for approval dies a quiet death, and something infinitely more dangerous takes its place. Not the crude brutality that masquerades as strength, not the desperate theatrics of those who mistake volume for authority, but something else entirely. Something that makes even darkness hesitate before it approaches. You see, most people live their entire lives as open books, their pages fluttering desperately in every wind that passes, begging to be read, understood, validated. They broadcast their intentions like street performers, their vulnerabilities like neon signs, their desires like advertisements for their own exploitation. They think transparency equals authenticity, that emotional availability equals depth, that being seen equals being powerful. They could not be more wrong. The transformation begins in the spaces they cannot see. While they're busy performing their humanity for an audience that stopped watching years ago, you're learning the most dangerous skill of all, the art of becoming unreadable. Not mysterious in that manufactured way that still seeks attention, not aloof in that wounded way that still craves healing, but genuinely, profoundly, impenetrably opaque. You become a surface so smooth that their attempts at manipulation slide off like water from glass, so reflective that when they look at you, all they see is themselves. Machiavelli understood this when he wrote that it is better to be feared than loved, but he only scratched the surface. The ultimate power is not to be feared or loved or even known, but to be undecodable. To exist in a state so refined that you operate from frequencies they cannot detect, much less disrupt. This is not about hiding who you are. This is about evolving into something that cannot be contained by their limited vocabulary of human understanding. Watch what happens when you stop explaining yourself. Notice how their confusion transforms into something approaching respect. How their attempts to provoke you begin to feel increasingly hollow even to them. See how their aggression, once so sharp and cutting, begins to dull against your complete lack of reaction. They throw their best shots, and you don't even acknowledge that a fight was supposed to be happening. Consider this scenario. You're in a meeting, and someone decides to challenge your competence publicly. The old you would have defended, explained, justified. The evolved you does something different. You look at them for exactly 3 seconds longer than comfort would dictate. You let the silence stretch until it becomes a weight in the room. Then you speak, but not to them. You address the room as if they hadn't spoken at all. As I was saying about the quarterly projections, you continue as if their interruption was simply background noise, like traffic outside a window. You don't dismiss them actively, you dismiss them existentially. They cease to exist in your reality until they learn how to exist properly within it. The room feels the shift. Power just moved, and everyone knows it except the person who thought they were taking it. Here's what they don't understand about silence. It's not the absence of communication, it's communication at its most sophisticated level. When you stop feeding their need for reaction, you force them to confront the echo chamber of their own desperation. They escalate, and your stillness makes their escalation appear unhinged. They demand response, and your peace makes their demands appear like tantrums. They attack, and your immunity makes their attacks appear futile even to them. But this goes deeper than social dynamics. This is about recognizing that most of what passes for human interaction is really just elaborate forms of energy vampirism. They speak not to communicate, but to regulate their own emotional states through your responses. They question not to understand, but to create the friction that feeds their sense of aliveness. They challenge not to improve anything, but to feel the hit of superiority when you stumble. When you stop being a source of supply for their emotional regulation, something fascinating happens. They begin to experience withdrawal, not just from you, but from the hit they got from manipulating you. They cycle through the stages of addiction, denial, anger, bargaining, depression. They'll try to re-engage you at increasingly sophisticated levels. They'll use guilt, curiosity, false emergencies, manufactured crises. They'll recruit others to apply pressure. They'll question your mental health, your loyalties, your character. Let them. Every attack that meets your silence is energy they're spending from their own reserves to fuel their own frustration. Every provocation that you allow to pass through you, like light through clear water, is another confirmation to the universe that you are no longer operating from their level of consciousness. You're not playing their game anymore. You're not even in their reality anymore. This is where the work becomes alchemical. You're not just changing your responses, you're transmuting your entire energetic signature. Where once you were reactive metal, you're becoming unreactive noble element. Where once you were matter that could be heated, cooled, shaped, and molded by external forces, you're becoming something that maintains its essential structure regardless of the environment. The practical applications are limitless. In relationships, when they start the familiar dance of manufacturing drama, you simply don't hear the music. You remain present but not available for the performance. They escalate their emotional terrorism, and you respond with the same energy you'd give to clouds changing shape in the sky. Mild interest at best, complete indifference at standard. "You never listen to me," they scream. You look at them with genuine curiosity, as if they'd just spoken in a language you don't recognize, but find mildly interesting. "I heard you," you say, not defensive, not explanatory, just stating a fact. "Then why aren't you responding?" "I did respond. I told you I heard you." The beauty is in the complete absence of escalation in your energy. They're trying to create a fire, and you're not providing any combustible material. They're trying to start a war, and you're not enrolling as the enemy. They're trying to make you wrong, and you're not participating in the framework where wrong and right have the meaning they're assigning. In professional environments, when they attempt to undermine your authority through passive-aggressive questioning, you employ what can only be called metaphysical aikido. Their energy comes toward you with force, and instead of meeting force with force, you become the space through which their force moves, leaving them unbalanced by their own momentum. "I'm not sure you've thought this through," they say, with that particular smile that's supposed to plant seeds of self-doubt. You pause, not because you're considering their statement, but because you're observing them with the kind of detached fascination an entomologist might feel, watching an interesting insect behavior. You say, and return to your work. That's it. No defense, no counterattack, no justification. Just acknowledgement that sound waves reached your eardrums and were processed as minimally as necessary. They're left holding their aggression like someone who brought a gift to a party and discovered they're at the wrong address. But here's where it transcends mere tactical advantage and becomes spiritual warfare. As you develop this capacity for complete non-engagement with their chaos, you begin to notice something that might initially disturb you. You're becoming immune to more than just their attacks. You're becoming immune to their approval as well. The same mechanism that makes you unreachable to their criticism makes you equally unreachable to their praise. This is the point where most people falter. They can handle being immune to negativity, but they discover they're not ready to be immune to validation. They want the armor against bad feelings, but not against good feelings. They want to be unmanipulable by threats, but still manipulable by rewards. This is impossible. You cannot select which frequencies you're immune to. The development of immunity is absolute, or it is nothing. Machiavelli warned that he who is feared by his citizens is infinitely safer than he who is beloved by them, but he was still thinking in terms of external relationships. The true teaching is that the one who needs neither fear nor love from others has transcended the entire framework of external validation that keeps most humans in perpetual psychological slavery. Watch what happens in social media environments when they attempt to trigger you into defending yourself publicly. The old paradigm says you must respond, must correct the record, must set the story straight. The evolved paradigm recognizes that engaging with their accusations gives the accusations a weight and reality they would not otherwise possess. They post something designed to damage your reputation. The sleeping version of you would craft a carefully worded response, marshalling evidence, building arguments, recruiting allies. The awakened version of you does something that borders on supernatural. Nothing. Not nothing because you didn't see it, Nothing because you don't care about your reputation, nothing because you understand that your reality is not up for vote, and participating in their trial of you would be accepting their authority to judge you. Your silence becomes a kind of metaphysical statement. This is not my court, you are not my jury, and your opinions carry no weight in the reality I inhabit. The effect on observers is profound. Those who would have been swayed by a well-crafted defense find themselves instead confronted with something far more unsettling. Someone who appears genuinely unmoved by accusations that would devastate a normal ego. This suggests either supreme confidence or supreme indifference, both of which are forms of power that make people deeply uncomfortable. Your accusers find themselves in the strange position of shadowboxing. They've thrown their best punches at someone who not only didn't fall, but didn't even acknowledge that a fight was supposed to be happening. They escalate, bringing others into the attack, manufacturing new accusations. But your continued absence from the battlefield makes them appear increasingly unhinged to neutral observers. Here's exactly how you execute this in romantic relationships, where the stakes feel highest and the manipulation most sophisticated. They've learned your triggers over time, mapped your emotional responses, discovered which buttons produce which reactions. They've become expert pianists of your nervous system, and they expect to continue playing you like their favorite instrument. When they deploy the silent treatment designed to make you chase them, you don't chase. You don't even notice. You continue your life with the same energy you had when they were speaking to you. You don't ask what's wrong. Don't try to fix it. Don't attempt to draw them out of their manufactured emotional cave. They escalate to the next level. The indirect attack through mutual friends, the strategic display of interest in others, the carefully crafted social media posts designed to make you feel replaced or forgotten. You remain unchanged. Not unchanged because you're suppressing emotion or because you don't notice what they're doing. Unchanged because their actions are happening in a reality that no longer has power over your internal state. You've achieved what the mystics call non-attachment, but not through spiritual bypassing or emotional numbing, through the recognition that your well-being was never actually dependent on their behavior in the first place. This is perhaps the most dangerous realization of all. That your emotional reactions to others were always optional, that your peace was always your own possession, that your power was always internal. When you truly integrate this understanding, you become something that cannot be controlled, cannot be manipulated, cannot be used as a source of supply for their various psychological hungers. The shift is so fundamental that it affects every interaction. In family dynamics, when they deploy the familiar guilt mechanisms that once moved you like marionette strings, you receive their words with the kind of neutral attention you might give to weather reports for a city you'll never visit. Mildly informative, completely irrelevant to your plans. After everything I've done for you, they begin, and you can feel them reaching for the emotional levers that used to control your responses. You nod thoughtfully, as if they've shared an interesting historical fact about a distant civilization. That's quite a perspective, you might say, not arguing with their assessment, but not allowing it to create any change in your internal climate. They're expecting defense, justification, or counter-accusation. Instead, they get the kind of response they might receive from an anthropologist studying their cultural practices, interested but not invested, observant but not available for manipulation. The professional applications become particularly elegant when you realize that most workplace drama is really just elaborate attempts to create hierarchies of emotional disturbance. They want to see who can be flustered, who can be provoked, who can be made to lose composure. Your complete immunity to these games makes you appear either supremely confident or genuinely superior. And in the perception game that dominates professional environments, appearance becomes reality. When they attempt to credit steal or blame shift, you respond with what can only be called strategic indifference. You don't fight for recognition because you've transcended the need for external validation of your contributions. You don't defend against false accusations because you understand that your reality is not dependent on their narratives. I think we all know what really happened here. they say, attempting to create complicity in a lie that damages your standing. You look at them with the kind of mild curiosity you might display towards someone speaking in a foreign language you don't understand, but find vaguely interesting. Do we, you ask, not challenging their statement, but not supporting it either. Just reflecting their words back to them like a mirror, forcing them to confront the hollowness of their manipulation attempt. The room feels the shift. Without defending yourself, you've made their attack appear baseless. Without accusing them, you've made their dishonesty visible to everyone present. Without engaging in conflict, you've won by not participating in a game where winning would have diminished you. This is the paradox that Machiavelli intuited, but never fully articulated, that the most effective forms of power are those that don't appear to be power at all. When you cease to be movable by external forces, you become an immovable force yourself. When you stop reacting to their provocations, you make their provocations appear reactionary. When you achieve genuine indifference to their approval and disapproval, you become the standard by which approval and disapproval are measured. But here's where the transformation becomes truly alchemical. As you develop immunity to their emotional manipulation, you simultaneously develop what can only be called supernatural composure. Your nervous system learns to remain in a state of coherent calm, regardless of the chaos swirling around you. This isn't suppression or dissociation, this is evolution. You become the eye of every storm you encounter, not because you're avoiding the wind, but because you've transcended the conditions that create internal turbulence. Others rage and you remain clear. Others panic and you remain steady. Others manipulate and you remain unmoved. Not because you're cold or disconnected, but because you've discovered that your natural state is one of unshakable peace. In group confrontations, when they attempt to isolate you through social pressure, you employ what can only be called gravitational authority. Instead of fighting against their attempts to exclude you, you become so centered in your own reality that others begin to orbit around your stability rather than their chaos. Picture this. You're at a social gathering and someone decides to make you the target of group ridicule. The old paradigm would have you either fighting back or withdrawing in shame. The evolved paradigm has you doing something that borders on metaphysical aikido. You don't defend, you don't explain, you don't counterattack. You simply exist in your own space with such completeness that their attacks begin to feel hollow, even to the attackers. You might smile slightly, as if they've just told you an amusing story about strangers. You remain present, but not available for the drama they're trying to create. "Did you hear what I said?" they demand, frustrated by your lack of reaction. "I heard you." You respond with the same energy you might use to acknowledge that someone had mentioned the temperature outside. Your complete lack of defensive energy makes their attack appear unprovoked and excessive to neutral observers. Your refusal to engage in the expected dance of conflict resolution makes them appear increasingly desperate for your attention. They escalate, and your continued equilibrium makes their escalation appear unhinged. Here's what's happening at the energetic level. They're expecting you to match their frequency of agitation. They're broadcasting chaos and expecting you to tune into their station. Instead, you remain on your own frequency, a frequency of such clarity and stillness that it begins to affect everyone in the vicinity. People unconsciously begin to prefer your energy to theirs. Without saying anything, without doing anything, you become the standard of normalized behavior in the room. Their chaos begins to feel exhausting even to them, while your peace becomes magnetic. This is the point where the transformation transcends personal development and becomes something approaching magic. You discover that your state of consciousness is not just yours to maintain, it's yours to transmit. Your immunity to their emotional disturbance doesn't just protect you, it begins to influence the entire field of interaction. In intimate relationships, when they attempt to create drama through emotional volatility, you become what therapists call a stable attachment figure. But what mystics recognize as something more significant, a person whose internal climate is weather-resistant. Their storms pass through your space without disturbing your atmosphere. "You don't even care," they scream, trying to provoke you into emotional chaos. that would validate their own internal turbulence. You look at them with the kind of compassionate clarity usually reserved for watching small children have tantrums about things that don't matter. "I care about you," you say simply. "I don't care about this drama." The distinction is crucial. You're not becoming cold or disconnected. You're becoming discriminating about where you invest your emotional energy. You care deeply about the person while remaining completely unmoved by their attempts to regulate their emotions through your reactions. They escalate. Threats, ultimatums, manufactured crises designed to force you into reactive mode. You remain in responsive mode, present, aware, engaged, but not hooked into their chaos. You respond to what's real while allowing what's manufactured to dissolve from lack of attention. This level of emotional sovereignty has effects that ripple far beyond the immediate relationship. Others begin to notice something different about you. They can't quite identify what's changed, but they sense that you've become unreachable to the usual forms of social manipulation. This makes some people deeply uncomfortable and others deeply attracted to your energy. The uncomfortable ones will escalate their attempts to disturb your peace, like people trying to wake someone who they're not sure is really sleeping. They'll test your boundaries with increasingly sophisticated forms of provocation. They'll recruit others to apply pressure. They'll question your mental health, your emotional availability, your commitment to the relationship. The attracted ones will begin to seek your company, not because you entertain them or validate them, but because your presence provides relief from the exhausting drama that characterizes most human interaction. You become a refuge from the chaos that others create and mistake for aliveness. But here's where it becomes dangerous. Dangerous to their system of control, dangerous to their comfort, dangerous to their sense of reality. As you develop complete immunity to their emotional manipulation, you begin to develop something even more unsettling. The ability to see through their facades with crystalline clarity. When someone is not hooked into your nervous system through emotional manipulation, you can observe their behavior with the kind of detached accuracy usually reserved for scientific study. You begin to see the patterns, the strategies, the unconscious programs running their responses. You see their fears, their wounds, their desperate attempts to control their environment through control of others. This seeing is not judgment, it's recognition. You recognize the terrified child behind the adult manipulator, the wounded animal behind the predatory behavior, the profound insecurity behind the aggressive facade. This recognition doesn't make you more vulnerable to their manipulation. It makes you completely immune to it. You see their attacks for what they really are. Desperate attempts to create external order to compensate for internal chaos. You see their demands for validation as symptoms of a nervous system that never learned how to self-regulate. You see their emotional volatility as a strategy learned in childhood for getting needs met in an unpredictable environment. This level of clarity is simultaneously the most compassionate and most terrifying response they could encounter. Compassionate because you see their pain without judgment. Terrifying because you see their pain without being moved to fix it, manage it, or take responsibility for it. Machiavelli observed that everyone sees what you appear to be, few experience what you really are, but he was thinking in terms of strategic deception. The deeper truth is that when you stop performing for others' perception, you become genuinely unknowable to those who only understand performative identity. You're not hiding who you are. You're being who you are at such an authentic level that those who only recognize masks cannot recognize you at all. You become a person who exists outside their framework of human understanding, someone operating from premises they cannot decode. In professional environments, this translates to a form of authority that cannot be challenged because it doesn't seek to be recognized. You don't defend your competence because your competence is self-evident to you. You don't argue for your value because your value is not up for debate in your reality. You don't compete for position because you understand that your position is determined by your capacity, not by others' acknowledgement of your capacity. When they attempt to undermine you through office politics, you respond with what can only be called immune system intelligence. You recognize the threat neutralize it through non-engagement, and continue your work with the same focus you had before the threat appeared. "I'm not sure you understand the complexity of this project," they say, attempting to plant seeds of incompetence. You pause, not because you're considering their assessment, but because you're observing them with the kind of scientific curiosity a researcher might feel watching predictable behavior in a laboratory setting. "Thank you for your concern," you respond, not with sarcasm, but with genuine appreciation for their attempt to be helpful, even though their method reveals more about their insecurity than about your competence. The phrase, "thank you for your concern," becomes a kind of linguistic aikido. It acknowledges their communication without accepting their framework. It treats their attack as care, which forces them to either admit they were attacking or accept that their attack was ineffective. Either way, you remain unharmed, and they remain confused about why their usual tactics felt so hollow. This confusion is the beginning of their education. As they encounter someone who cannot be manipulated through the usual channels, they're forced to either develop more authentic forms of communication or exhaust themselves against your immunity. Most choose exhaustion, which is a form of education in itself. But the real magic happens in the space between words, in the quality of presence you bring to every interaction. When you're no longer using your attention to monitor threats, manage others' emotions, or maintain facades, that attention becomes available for something far more powerful, genuine presence. You become someone who listens, not to formulate responses, but to truly hear. You speak not to defend positions, but to share truth. You act not to create impressions, but to express authenticity. This level of presence is so rare in human interaction that it has effects bordering on the supernatural. People find themselves saying things to you they've never said to anyone. They reveal truths in your presence that they've hidden from themselves. They feel safe in ways they can't explain and understood in ways they've never experienced. This isn't because you're trying to be therapeutic or manipulating them into trust. This is the automatic result of encountering someone who has nothing to defend and nothing to prove. In romantic contexts, this presence becomes intoxicating to those who are ready for authentic connection and terrifying to those who depend on drama for a sense of aliveness. When you're no longer available for the usual games of pursue, withdraw, attack, defend, break up, make up, you force the relationship into a deeper level of engagement, or it naturally ends. They test your boundaries with increasingly sophisticated forms of emotional manipulation. They threaten to leave, and you wish them well on their journey. They manufacture jealousy situations, and you respond with genuine curiosity about their needs rather than possessive anxiety. They create crises that would have previously had you rushing to fix their feelings, and you offer support while making it clear that their emotional regulation is their responsibility. You're different, they say, and you can hear the confusion in their voice. Yes, you agree, not explaining how or why, not defending the change, not apologizing for evolving. That simple acknowledgement without explanation becomes a demonstration of your new operational system. You're no longer seeking their approval of your growth, their permission to change, or their understanding of your evolution. You've become someone who exists independently of their assessment. This independence is not isolation, it's sovereignty. You're fully available for connection without being available for control. You're present without being possessible. You're loving without being manipulatable. This combination of availability and immunity creates a form of relationship that most people have never experienced and don't know how to navigate. Here's where it transcends personal transformation and becomes environmental influence. As you embody this level of emotional sovereignty, you begin to affect every space you enter. Your immunity to chaos becomes a stabilizing force that others unconsciously orient toward. Your refusal to engage in drama creates a vacuum that often gets filled with more authentic communication. In family systems, your transformation forces everyone else to examine their own patterns. When you're no longer available to play your assigned role in the family drama, the entire system has to reorganize. Some family members will desperately try to pull you back into the old patterns through guilt, manipulation, or even anger about your selfishness in changing. "You think you're better than us now," they say, trying to shame you back into compliance with dysfunctional patterns. You look at them with the kind of compassionate clarity usually reserved for watching someone struggle with a puzzle they're not ready to solve. "I think I'm different than I used to be," you say simply, not claiming superiority, but not denying evolution. The difference is crucial. You're not positioning yourself as better. You're acknowledging that you've changed in ways that make the old patterns impossible for you to participate in. This forces them to either evolve their own patterns or find other people to maintain the dysfunction with. Some will choose evolution, inspired by your example to examine their own participation in dysfunctional cycles. Others will choose replacement, finding new people willing to play the roles you're no longer available for. Both outcomes serve the highest good, even though one feels more immediately gratifying than the other. But here's what happens next, and this is where the transformation becomes genuinely supernatural. As you achieve complete immunity to external manipulation, you simultaneously develop the capacity for what can only be called benevolent influence. Your peace becomes powerful not because you use it as a weapon, but because it demonstrates possibilities that others didn't know existed. You become living proof that it's possible to remain calm in chaos, peaceful in conflict, and clear in confusion. This demonstration is more persuasive than any argument, more influential than any manipulation, more powerful than any force. You influence through example rather than effort, through being rather than doing. In group dynamics, your presence begins to shift the entire field of interaction. Conversations become more authentic when you're present because you're not performing, and others feel permission to stop performing as well. Conflicts resolve more easily because you're not adding fuel to inflammatory dynamics. Decisions get made more efficiently because you're not caught up in the political undercurrents that usually slow progress. You become what systems theorists call a strange attractor, a stable pattern that influences other patterns toward greater coherence. Your emotional immunity creates a field of stability that allows others to explore more authentic ways of being without the usual social risks. This influence operates at frequencies below conscious awareness. People feel different in your presence without being able to identify why. They find themselves behaving more authentically, speaking more truthfully, responding more thoughtfully. This isn't manipulation on your part. It's the natural result of encountering someone who has transcended the usual human patterns of defense and pretense. Machiavelli taught that the best fortress that exists is not to be hated by the people, but the ultimate fortress is not to need protection from the people because you've become immune to the things they could threaten you with. When you no longer fear their rejection, their criticism, their abandonment, or their attacks, you become genuinely invulnerable. This invulnerability is not armor, it's transparency. You become like clear water that attacks pass through without resistance and without effect. You don't fight their energy, you don't absorb their energy, you don't reflect their energy. You simply remain yourself while their energy moves through your space and dissipates from lack of anything solid to impact. The practical implications are profound. In negotiations, you never appear desperate because you're genuinely not desperate. Your well-being is not dependent on any particular outcome, which gives you access to options that desperate people cannot see. You can walk away from anything that doesn't serve you, which makes everything that remains genuinely chosen rather than endured. In conflicts, you never appear defensive because you have nothing to defend. Your sense of self is not dependent on others' opinions, which means their attacks literally have no target. They're swinging at someone who isn't there in the way they expect, someone who exists outside their framework of human vulnerability. In relationships, you never appear needy because you've discovered that your needs can be met through your own internal resources. This doesn't mean you don't appreciate connection. It means you choose connection from wholeness rather than seeking connection to fill emptiness. This wholeness is perhaps the most threatening thing you could develop because it reveals the optional nature of most human suffering. When others see someone who has transcended the emotional patterns that define their reality, it creates both inspiration and terror. Inspiration because it demonstrates that evolution is possible. Terror because it suggests their suffering might be chosen rather than inevitable. Here's exactly how this plays out in the most challenging scenarios. When they mount coordinated attacks designed to destroy your reputation, your relationships, or your livelihood, you respond with what can only be called supernatural equanimity. Not because you don't care about the outcomes, but because you understand that your essential self cannot be damaged by external circumstances. They spread lies about your character, and you don't waste energy defending against falsehoods. Truth has a way of revealing itself without your assistance, and lies have a way of collapsing under their own weight when you don't give them energy through opposition. They attempt to turn others against you through manipulation and selective storytelling. You don't counterattack with your own version of events. You trust that authentic relationships can weather coordinated deception, and relationships that can't weather it were never authentic in the first place. They threaten your professional standing through strategic undermining and calculated sabotage. You don't engage in office politics or defensive maneuvering. You continue to do excellent work and allow your results to speak louder than their campaigns. This approach requires a level of faith that most people cannot access. Faith that truth is more powerful than lies, that integrity is more influential than manipulation, that authentic value cannot be destroyed by inauthentic attacks. This faith is not naive optimism. It's recognition of how reality actually operates when you're not constantly interfering with its natural processes. The attackers find themselves in an increasingly uncomfortable position. They're expending enormous energy trying to destroy someone who doesn't seem to notice they're under attack. They escalate their efforts, recruit more allies, develop more sophisticated strategies, but your continued peace in the face of their war makes them appear increasingly unhinged to neutral observers. Here's what they don't understand. By refusing to engage in warfare, you've changed the rules of the game so fundamentally that their strategies become irrelevant. They're playing chess while you've transcended the need to play games at all. They're fighting an enemy who won't validate their reality by becoming an enemy in return. This is perhaps the most sophisticated form of power that exists, the power to render opposition obsolete through non-participation. When you refuse to accept their framework of conflict, you force them to question whether the conflict they're fighting is real or imaginary. Most discover it was imaginary, which is an uncomfortable revelation about how much energy they've wasted fighting ghosts. But the ultimate demonstration of this evolutionary leap happens in your most intimate relationships, where the stakes feel highest and the patterns run deepest. When someone who knows your triggers attempts to use them against you and discovers that those triggers no longer exist, they experience something close to existential confusion. They push the buttons that used to send you into reactive spirals, and nothing happens. They deploy the emotional manipulation that used to control your behavior, and you respond with curiosity rather than compliance. They threaten to withdraw love, and you wish them well, while making it clear that your well-being is not dependent on their emotional availability. "I don't even know who you are anymore," they say, and you can hear the genuine bewilderment in their voice. "I'm the same person I've always been," you reply. "I'm just not performing for your comfort anymore." That distinction is everything. You haven't become cold or disconnected. You've become authentic in ways that no longer require their approval. You've evolved beyond the need to manage their emotional responses to your existence. You've transcended the exhausting work of making yourself palatable to people who want to consume rather than connect with you. This authenticity is simultaneously the most loving and most challenging gift you could offer someone. Loving because it invites them into genuine relationship rather than performative exchange. Challenging because it requires them to examine their own patterns of using others for emotional regulation. Some will rise to meet you at this level of authenticity. They'll do their own work, examine their own patterns, evolve their own capacity for genuine connection. These relationships become extraordinary, connections between two people who have nothing to defend and nothing to prove, who meet each other from overflow rather than emptiness. Others will exhaust themselves against your immunity and eventually seek easier targets for their manipulation strategies. These departures are gifts, even though they may initially feel like losses. Every person who leaves because they can't control you is making space for someone who doesn't want to control you. As this process completes itself, you discover something that borders on the mystical. You've become immune not just to their manipulation, but to the entire framework of external validation that keeps most humans in psychological slavery. You no longer need their approval to feel good about yourself. You no longer need their understanding to feel understood. You no longer need their love to feel lovable. This doesn't mean you don't appreciate approval, understanding, and love when they're authentically offered. It means you've discovered that these experiences are available through your own internal resources, which makes anything you receive from others a bonus rather than a necessity. The freedom this creates is beyond description. When you no longer need anything from anyone, you become available for everything with everyone. When you're not scanning for threats to your ego, you can perceive reality with unprecedented clarity. When you're not managing others' impressions of you, you can respond to what's actually happening rather than what you think is happening. This clarity reveals something that changes everything. Most of what you thought was personal was never personal at all. Their attacks were about their pain, not your inadequacy. Their manipulation was about their fear, not your gullibility. Their approval-seeking was about their emptiness, not your worth. When you truly integrate this understanding, you develop what can only be called cosmic perspective on human behavior. You see the fear behind aggression, the pain behind cruelty, the emptiness behind manipulation. This seeing is not an invitation to fix, manage, or take responsibility for their inner experience. It's recognition that allows you to respond to what's real rather than reacting to what's performed. You become someone who sees through facades without needing to expose them, who understands motivations without needing to address them, who recognizes manipulation without needing to resist it. You simply exist at a frequency that renders most human drama irrelevant to your experience. This is the point where you realize that true power was never about controlling others or resisting their control. True power is the capacity to remain yourself regardless of what's happening around you. True strength is not the ability to fight, it's immunity to the need to fight. True invincibility is not armor against attacks, it's transparency that makes attacks impossible. Machiavelli concluded that since it is difficult to join them together, it is safer to be feared than to be loved when one of the two must be lacking. But he was still operating within the paradigm of external relationship management. The ultimate safety comes from transcending the entire framework of needing to be feared or loved by others. You become someone who exists outside their emotional weather systems, someone who maintains internal climate regardless of external conditions, someone who operates from principles that cannot be compromised by circumstances. This is not detachment from life. This is engagement with life from a position of unshakable stability. When you reach this level of development, something extraordinary happens. You begin to attract experiences and relationships that match your new frequency. The people who enter your life are no longer drawn by what they can get from you, but by what they can experience with you. The opportunities that present themselves are aligned with your authentic capabilities rather than your performed personas. You discover that when you stop performing for others' comfort, you create space for authentic connection. When you stop managing others' emotional responses to your existence, you become available for genuine relationship. When you stop defending against imaginary threats, you can perceive actual opportunities. This is the completion of the metamorphosis. From someone who lived in reactive response to external circumstances to someone who generates reality from internal resources. From someone who sought power through control of others to someone who embodies power through mastery of self. From someone who needed the world to be different to feel good to someone who feels good regardless of how the world presents itself. The transformation is complete, but the evolution continues. Having achieved immunity to external manipulation, You begin to develop capacities that seemed impossible from your previous level of consciousness. You become capable of influence without effort, of leadership without force, of authority without aggression. You discover that when you stop trying to change others, you become a catalyst for their transformation. When you stop defending your position becomes unassailable. When you stop fighting for respect, you command respect through your very presence. This is the ultimate paradox of power. The moment you stop needing it, you embody it completely. The moment you stop seeking it, you become it entirely. The moment you transcend the need for external validation, you become internally validated in ways that no external force can threaten. You have become something that cannot be decoded, manipulated, or controlled, because you are no longer operating from the frequencies where decoding, manipulation, and control are possible. You exist in a reality where attack is impossible because there is nothing to attack, where defense is unnecessary because there is nothing to defend, where victory is meaningless because there is no enemy to defeat. This is not the end of your story. It is the beginning of your true story. The story of someone who has transcended the human condition without leaving their humanity behind, who has achieved invulnerability without becoming invulnerable, who has gained ultimate power by surrendering the need for any power at all. From this place, every interaction becomes an opportunity for authentic expression rather than strategic positioning. Every relationship becomes a space for genuine connection rather than mutual manipulation. Every challenge becomes an invitation for creative response rather than reactive defense. You have become unmovable while remaining in constant motion, unreachable while remaining completely available, incomprehensible while maintaining perfect clarity. You are the eye of every storm, the center of every chaos, the stillness around which all activity organizes itself. This is the true meaning of power. Not the ability to control others, but the capacity to remain yourself regardless of others' attempts to change you. Not the strength to dominate circumstances, but the flexibility to flow with circumstances while maintaining your essential nature. Not the armor to deflect attacks, but the transparency to allow attacks to pass through you without impact. You have achieved something that most people believe is impossible. Complete freedom within complete engagement, total security within total vulnerability, ultimate strength through absolute gentleness. You have become dangerous not because you can harm others, but because you cannot be harmed. You have become powerful not because you can force outcomes, but because you need no particular outcome to feel complete. You are what they fear most. Someone who has transcended their entire system of control, someone who operates from principles they cannot touch, someone who exists in realities they cannot access. You are proof that their manipulation is optional, their drama is chosen, their suffering is unnecessary. You are the question mark that makes them question everything they thought they knew about how life works. You are the silence that makes their noise sound hollow. You are the stillness that makes their chaos appear exhausting even to them. You have become immune to their influence while remaining infinitely influential. You have achieved invincibility through vulnerability, power through surrender, victory through the transcendence of all need to win. You are the ultimate paradox. Someone who cannot be defeated because they are no longer fighting. Someone who cannot be controlled because they no longer resist. Someone who cannot be manipulated because they no longer react. This is your new reality, a space of such profound peace that even the shadows hesitate before approaching, a presence so authentically powerful that it needs no demonstration, a consciousness so completely evolved that it attracts only what matches its frequency while remaining immune to everything that doesn't. You have become undecodable, unreachable, and ultimately truly free.